Ledo is an orphan loser who spent his life fighting space squids on behalf of humanity. Everything changed when he mysteriously woke up on an abandoned planet and realizes he's the only one with a tool big enough to clap all of his enemies. This happened thousands of years after Earth froze over and humanity settled in a new utopia called Avalon. Their home was protected by the Galactic Alliance of Mankind, who fought against the monsters called Hados using AI transformers. One morning, Ledo is greeted by his colonel, Kugel, who informs him of their mission to attack the Hado's nest. However, the mission goes horribly wrong when they suffer several casualties. Kugel sacrifices himself to give Ledo a chance to retreat to home base, but Ledo gets attacked by a Hados, causing him to fall into a wormhole. 6 months later on Earth, a group of salvagers find Ledo's mecha and try to open it up. A delivery girl called Amy asks the group what it is, but none of them have any idea since they can't read the language on the suit. Meanwhile, Ledo finally wakes up and Chamber informs him that he was asleep until this group of people found him. Ledo thinks they must be drifters who haven't joined the Alliance yet, but their language is foreign to him. Chamber informs Ledo that it's unable to determine their coordinates, and no one has responded to the distress signals sent all this time. With no other choice, Ledo decides to wait for an opportunity to go outside and assess the situation. Hours pass, and the number of salvagers reduces until there's only one left, Pinion. After he leaves, Ledo pops out his mecha and removes his hood to preserve his oxygen reserve. He was unprepared for the stench of man's sweat and how primitive their technology seemed. Suddenly, he ran and hid as Pinion returned to the room with Amy. As she looked around the suit, Pinion noticed footsteps on the floor and warned Amy to come to his side quickly. However, Ledo grabbed Amy as a hostage and warned Pinion not to get closer. Neither of the two sides could understand each other, so Pinion rushed forward, causing Ledo to run off with Amy. Because of this, an alarm was sounded to warn the others of an intruder. Meanwhile, Ledo instructs Chamber to map out the ship and analyze their language. The rest of the crew appears to stop Ledo, but he continues to evade them. After analyzing the container, Chamber suggests that the people can't be drifters because they don't appear to be on a spaceship at all. At that moment, Ledo finally makes it outside and is stunned to see he's on a planet full of water. As he looks around, Amy's pet jumps on him, forcing him to let Amy go, while the rest of the crew have him surrounded. Ledo immediately summons Chamber, who busts out of the hangar and flies behind Ledo. When Ledo asks where they are, Chamber explains that the only planet that could possibly have breathable air was Earth, the planet where humanity originated. The rest of the ship was stunned to see Chamber flying, so they called up their mechas for reinforcement. When Chamber flew forward to protect Ledo, Ledo instructed it to tell the people that they meant them no harm. At this, a woman named Rigid stepped forward and introduced herself as the aide of the Gargantia fleet. Chamber continued to act as a translating device for Ledo as he informed them that he was part of the Hado's extermination squad. The humans had never heard of the Hados, but Chamber insisted they join the Alliance. Rigid insisted they drop their weapons and asked the person in the suit to come out. However, Rigid was shocked to learn there was no one in it. Later, Amy went to see Rigid, who asked what she thought of Ledo since she has been closest to him. Amy says that Ledo seemed confused and didn't seem like he wanted to hurt her. Rigid asks Pinion if he knows anything about the mecha, but Pinion laments not being able to stick a knife in it. Rigid turns to Bellows, since she's the one who found the mecha, but Bellows says she's pretty clueless as well. Rigid then reports to the commander that the suit is made of advanced technology and suggests taking it apart, but the commander tells them not to do anything in case Ledo is not alone. Meanwhile, Chamber asks Ledo why they don't just take out their leader and force cooperation, but Ledo says they'll need the people's historical records if they hope to rejoin their allies. What's more, since Earth is actually still habitable, it could replace Avalon as their homeworld. Meanwhile, Amy prepares to begin her deliveries to the day when her friends run up to her and ask about the cute boy who sampled her rice cakes earlier. However, Amy tells them she's busy and jumps off the deck to fly to another part of the ship. Later, she visits her younger brother, Bevel, who also asks about the strange boy she met earlier. Amy describes him as nothing special and says there's another boy inside his mecha who can speak their language. She then hands Bevel a gift, which he adds to his toy ship. As he raises the ship up, he suggests that Ledo might have come from the stars. Then he reminds Amy of the legends of people escaping to the stars when the Earth froze. Afterward, Amy walks up to Ledo, and when Chamber determines that she poses no danger, Ledo walks toward her too. Amy then pulls out a piece of fish and offers some to Ledo to eat. Ledo is appalled that she'd eat a carcass, but when Chamber suggests that it's a ceremony of friendship, Ledo accepts and eats it too, shocking everyone. Amy introduces herself and asks where he's from, so Ledo simply points up. Some hours later, the fleet continues to listen as Ledo answers Amy's questions about the Hados in space. Amy notices that Chamber's speech has gotten even better, so she suggests that the person inside should come out. At this, Ledo shows Amy inside the mecha and explains that Chamber is simply an ad that assists him. Amy gets extra excited at the revelation while Ledo looks as confused by girls as you still are. After, Amy explains that after the Earth froze over and melted, it became a planet of water, so they now live by connecting their ships into fleets. The name of their fleet is Gargantia, but there are others out there too, including pirates. Suddenly, they notice a glowing strip of sea moving toward them, which Amy calls the galaxy current. The ships get their electricity from the current and ride along it, till it comes to an end. Suddenly, Ledo notices a shooting star and tells Chamber to recalculate their coordinates with it, but it still ends up being a dead end. The next day, Amy reports the news to her superiors who don't buy a word of what Ledo says, but Amy insists that they can't turn away someone in need. After this, Bellows leads a team to investigate the location where they found Ledo's mecha, while Ledo makes up his mind to cooperate with the fleet till he can contact his allies. Suddenly, an alarm goes off and some of the men report that pirates are attacking Bellows' ship. Bellows tells her men to stay underwater while the pirates approach and prepare to attack. Her men try their best to shoot the pirates, but pirates deploy their kites, giving them an aerial advantage. Bridget watches the chaos from afar, but when she requests for reinforcements, she's told they may not make it in time. Back on the ship deck, Amy runs up to Ledo to ask for help with the pirates, so Ledo agrees to help, hoping to use it as a bargaining chip later. Ledo powers up the mecha and prepares to take off, making Bridget wonder what he plans to do. Meanwhile, the pirates have already infiltrated Bellows' ship and taken them hostage, but Bellows refuses to cooperate. At the same time, Chamber identifies all the enemy ships and the men that are aboard Bellows' ship. Ledo orders him to eliminate all of them, so Chamber uses his laser beams to blow up the ships and vaporize the men instantly. However, as the people watch, they get a very bad feeling. When Chamber returns to the deck, Amy runs up to ask what happened out there and Ledo assures her that the enemies were all eliminated. When Amy realizes what he's done, she calls him a dumb and runs off, making Ledo wonder if women were the real reason Earth perished years ago. Later, Bellows reports what happened to the pirates, so Bridget tells the commander they can't allow Ledo to remain with them. One of the men suggests handing him over to the pirates, but Pinion warns them that he might join forces with them. Instead, the commander suggests they wait for the pirates to react and deploy countermeasures if they do. Meanwhile, Amy sits alone, regretting ever asking Ledo for help when Bellows walks up and asks for her help with something. Moments later, Amy flies Bellows to see Ledo. When Amy lands, she apologizes for yelling at him earlier, but he tells her there's no need to apologize. Bellows whips out yet another piece of meat as a peace offering, but Ledo isn't too thrilled at this. When they sit to talk, Bellows tells Ledo that murder is the greatest taboo for them. Ledo doesn't understand their logic, since they're willing to murder the animals for food, so Bellows explains they'd only eat enough to survive. She then points out that the pirates are human too, and it's wrong to take lives thoughtlessly. Ledo asks why they bother arming themselves if that's the case, so Bellows explains that since the pirates use weapons to threaten other fleets, they have to show them they won't go down without a fight. Basically, it's a form of negotiation. They all need to pull their resources or they won't survive, so the fleet needs a way to show them it's not worth attacking them. However, now that blood has been spilled, the pirates will seek to claim even more lives to regain their position. Ledo finally understands, so Bellows tells him they'll need his help fighting the pirates and hands him a communicator. She thanks him for saving her life and walks off. After, Amy tells Ledo to live with them if he's got nowhere else to go, so Ledo says he'll consider it. She then thanks him for helping with the pirates and flies off, leaving Ledo wondering what saying thank you means. Meanwhile, Rackage, the head of the pirates, gets word of Gargantia's actions and decides she wants to teach them a lesson. The pirates start heading toward Gargantia, and when the crew members spot them, they send word to the commander's office. There, the ship leaders realize that all the pirate ships in the area are coming for them, including Rackage, the baddest of them all. One of the captains suggests changing course, but the commander tells him it's no use since they can't outrun them. Since they'll be severely outmatched, Bridget suggests negotiations, but the commander reminds her they're coming for revenge. At this, Bellows suggests asking Ledo for help and contacts him on the communicator. When Ledo says he's willing to help, Bellows hands the communicator to the commander, but the other captains worry if it's the best thing to do. Bridget speaks to Ledo instead and asks why he would want to help their measly fleet if his firepower was enough to eliminate them all. Ledo explains that he hopes to trade with them, and since the pirates don't play by the rules, it is better to trade with Gargantia. Rigid advises the commander to take Ledo up on his deal in exchange for staying there, so the commander agrees. Later, Ledo meets with Rigid, who tells him to act as a diversion for the pirates without using excessive violence, while Pinion is too busy messing around with Chamber's cockpit. Afterward, the mission begins and the fleets prepare for the upcoming battle by turning off all their lights. Meanwhile, Rackage asks for any updates on the Gargantia fleet, but it seems they haven't made a move yet. The pirates feel confident that they're the masters of darkness until a bright light from Chamber shines down and reveals their location. The pirates immediately start attacking Chamber, but while they're distracted, the Gargantia ships fire from the opposite side. This doesn't seem to faze Rackage, who simply orders her men to fire back at them. After the two sides exchange firepower, the Gargantia ships take heavy damage. Chamber informs Ledo of this development, so Ledo decides to take out the pirates' weaponry and engines to help. At this, Chamber flies down and carries out the command, keeping casualties at 0. With the pirates now taking heavy damage, Rackage decides it's finally time to act. Back at the Gargantia fleet, the crew spots something moving underwater. Suddenly, small pirate mechas begin climbing up the side of the ship to attack. The Gargantia send out their mechas to confront them, while they try to gun some of them down. Rackage shows up in a specialized mecha and heads straight for the Gargantia. Though the leading ships try to stop her, her mecha is able to leap over them entirely in speed past any other obstacles. Finally, she crashes right into the hull close to where the commander and the other captains are gathered. As she starts making her way up, the commander tells the captains to get out of there since it's only him that she wants. However, before Rackage can get any further, Chamber latches onto her from behind. Suddenly, two of Rackage's underlings speed toward them and send ropes to pull Rackage and Chamber into the water. Rackage intends to take advantage of the water, but Chamber simply pulls them further in the air and tells them to surrender. Rackage says she'd rather die than surrender, so Chamber damages her mecha and throws her far away at sea. Seeing this, the rest of the pirates abandon the mission as the Gargantia crew rejoices. They'd all turn to Ledo to thank him for his help, but when Ledo asks what the phrase means, Chamber explains that it's used to express gratitude. Afterward, Rigid asks the commander what he intends to do about Ledo, but the commander asks Rigid to decide instead. Meanwhile, Ledo finally returns to the deck where Amy waits for him with dinner. In response, Ledo says thank you in their language. The next day, the Gargantia returns to their normal activities and even welcomes a new ship to its fleet. After meeting with the new captain, Rigid calls to inform the commander of everyone's good progress except for Ledo. Later, Ledo tries to assist with lifting cargo, but Chamber surprisingly sucks at working as a fancy forklift. Ledo feels bad about making things worse when he stumbles on his invoice. Earlier, Rigid had given Ledo a spot at the storage unit to sleep since they hadn't figured out his residency rights. However, Ledo didn't mind being technically homeless as long as Chamber stayed close to him. Lastly, Rigid handed him an invoice demanding he work to repay the damage he caused to the hangar. Annie reminds Rigid of Ledo's help with the pirates, but Rigid insists that the hangar damage was a separate issue, and there were other fees they were willing to waive during his stay. Ledo was fine with the arrangement, and that was how they ended up working to pay off those damages. One of the men tells Ledo to get back to work with moving the cargo, but when Chamber starts messing up again, a man named Joe asks if he could tell Chamber to listen to his instruction instead. Later, Amy flies by to deliver a package for Pinion when she sees Chamber hard at work with the cargo. However, when they notice Ledo sitting off to the side, Pinion calls him a slacker and suggests throwing him overboard. Meanwhile, Ledo lasers some holes into a weird object while he watches the kids run around in the heat. With no concept of fun, Ledo wonders how such undisciplined kids could possibly grow up to be productive members of society. The kids start gathering around Chamber, hoping to get a free ride, so Ledo grants Chamber permission to swat them away like flies. Just then, Amy runs up to ask Ledo what he's doing. When Ledo says he's standing by, Amy asks what he's making. Surprisingly, Ledo doesn't know what he's making either, and explains it's actually a Hado's claw. Amy says that it's really pretty, so Ledo tells her she can keep it since he has more where that came from. After, they both go for a walk, and Amy tells Ledo about her little brother. Ledo has never heard of the term before, and when Amy tries to explain what a family is, Ledo says they don't have any because it's inefficient. Amy then talks about Bevel's passion for space, but since he has chest disease, he's unable to go out and about. Ledo tells Amy that weak individuals are disposed of in the Galactic Alliance since they are unnecessary in combat. Amy is shocked by this, but Ledo doesn't understand what the problem is. He then asks to speak to someone who can give him useful intel. At this, Amy suggests taking him to see Dr. Ordom, who is the most knowledgeable person in the fleet. Ledo is led toward a dingy-looking container where Emmy introduces him to Dr. Ordom. Since Emmy has to continue her deliveries, she promises to pick Ledo up later and leaves. After, Ledo asks Dr. Ordom for information, and Dr. Ordom is surprised to see Chambers' technology for himself. The men sit down to talk, and Ledo asks if he knows any way to rejoin the Galactic Alliance. However, Dr. Ordom tells him most of their ancient knowledge has been lost, including any about interstellar travel. When he shows him the knowledge they have left, Ledo looks disappointed. He then asks about the organization of their fleet and why it's so inefficient, especially the part where they protect the weak. Dr. Ordom laughs as he hears this and tells Ledo he has a narrow interpretation of what efficiency means. He advises Ledo to talk to Bevel sometime, though it's up to him to decide how useful it will be. Later, Amy takes Ledo to meet Bevel. Bevel is excited to meet a real spaceman while Ledo still processes what a little brother is. Ledo immediately asks for information, but when Bevel is in awe of Chambers' technology, Ledo shows him a portable version of Chamber. Suddenly, Saya and Nulty show up asking for her help when they see Ledo and immediately start teasing Amy. Amy has to work again, so she leaves Ledo with Bevel, who tells her goodbye. After, Bevel asks Ledo if he's really from space and wonders what it's like. Ledo explains that the Galactic Alliance aims to defend against the Hados in a war that has been going on since the foundation of the Alliance till the present. Bevel asks if they ever get tired, but Ledo says anyone who gets tired will die. Disturbed, Bevel changes the subject to his new life on Gargantia, but Ledo laments not being able to understand their inefficient and unprofitable actions. Bevel informs him that the fleet isn't an organization, they're just people who gather to help each other out. When Ledo asks why, Bevel says it doesn't matter. Ledo insists that the purpose of humans is to subjugate the Hados, which means that people like Bevel would get weeded out immediately. At this, Bevel asks what will happen once they've defeated all the Hados. Ledo simply says he'll be on standby till he awaits his next orders. Bevel then explains that they're on standby too, which is pretty much the same as living on. Later, Bellows shows up to tease Ledo about letting Joe take over his mecha. Ledo simply asks if his actions were beneficial, so Bellows says that they were. However, Ledo laments not knowing what actions to take next. When Bellows tries to advise him, it suddenly starts to rain. Ledo gets freaked out, but Bellows tells him it's just fresh water and instructs him to collect some with Chamber. Ledo tells Chamber what to do while he observes everyone else, old and young, working together to collect the rainwater. Afterward, Ledo goes back to brooding as he wonders how the Alliance was faring in the war. Meanwhile, Saya and Nulty spot Ledo from afar and feel bad for him since he's all alone in a strange place. They figure Amy is worried too, so they send her off to talk to him. When she reaches him, she notices his wet clothes and invites him back to her place to dry off. There, Bevel continues to ask Ledo questions about space, so Ledo reveals that people like him don't exist in space. However, Bevel informs Ledo that his life is necessary because Amy needs him and he needs her too. Ledo doesn't understand, so Bevel picks up the Hado's claw and asks what it means to Ledo. Bevel suggests that it's a flute and shows him how to play it too. The sound brings back a memory of a young boy who looked like Ledo being shipped off with a Hado's claw. Ledo suddenly starts crying, but even he doesn't know why. He then asks Bevel for the Hado's claw back, while Amy returns with some tea. That night, Ledo asks Chamber if there's any update on their location, but Chamber says he's still working on it. At this, Ledo decides to learn more about the planet. The next day, Ledo goes back to his usual brooding when he remembers Bevel's question about what to do when the Hados are all defeated. He then asks Chamber to search for a job he can do on the fleet, but apparently no results turn up. When Ledo gets frustrated, Chamber reminds him that his only skill is telling an Anib what to do, so he's pretty much useless. Just then, Amy runs up to them and asks Chamber what he's building. Chamber mentions something cool while Ledo is still putting holes in Hado's claws. Amy asks to try it out, but when no sound comes out, she asks if it's not finished. Ledo insists it's useless either way, but Amy tells him not to be so harsh. She then hands him an envelope with his wage for loading the freight. When Ledo looks at it strangely, Amy asks if they have money in space, but Chamber tells her the Alliance doesn't allow soldiers to own private goods. Ledo tells Amy he wants to work by himself, so she tells him he needs to support someone in exchange for money. Unfortunately, Amy has no idea what type of job Ledo can do. Later, Ledo follows Amy around for her deliveries while she asks around for any job available. Sadly, the last job available just got taken. They head to the fisherman next, but there were almost more men there than fish. Next, they went to Bellows, but she explained that they were too busy to take in a newbie, so that was yet another dead end. Amy said she had to continue her deliveries, so Ledo suggested he search for jobs on his own. He headed back to the freight loading section, but Joe was too busy yelling orders to notice his existence. Everywhere he went, there seemed to be no vacancies while Chamber was busy stealing the spotlight. Finally, he found some work with a cattle herder, but Ledo would rather jump ship than shovel all day. After escaping with his life, Ledo asked Chamber if there were any job updates, but there was still nothing. Suddenly, an alarm went off and the fleet's engines came to a stop. At that moment, Pinion threw Ledo a beach shirt and told him to lighten up. When Ledo asked what was going on, Pinion simply told Ledo to come with him. Moments later, they met up with Amy and Bevel, who were wondering if it was really a good idea to throw a party. Pinion boasted about the perks of being a boss, but the idiot was actually hiding from his crew. On days of calm, they leave the galaxy current and cut the electricity so they can do maintenance on the ships. It's like a break. They finally arrive at their party spot and Ledo sees how beautiful the sea looks when it's not windy. Saya and Melty were already waiting for them, so Chamber joined the crew and the party officially began. The girls changed into bikinis and offered to show Ledo how to take his clothes off too. Before he knew it, he'd been stripped like a $2 hoe. While they messed around in the water, Bevel laid back on a lawn chair and was soon joined by Dr. Ordom. Later, Pinion got ready to grill his meat, but when he realized the power wasn't back yet, he asked Ledo if they could use Chamber instead. Ledo gave Chamber his instructions, but he ended up incinerating all the meat. Thankfully, there was more where that came from. Suddenly, Pinion called Ledo over for a job to go pick some stuff up for him. Amy was worried when she heard where Ledo would have to go, but Pinion reminded her that he wasted all that meat. Later, the girls rubbed their sunscreen all over while they lament, not wanting to get fat from eating too much barbecue. Suddenly, Amy gets a call from Ridget, who tells her to fly up to the sprinklers and turn on the pump. Amy laments having to leave the barbecue, but ultimately turns it into a race with the girls. After hearing this, Chamber asks Pinion why they're excited about eating but worried about getting fat. But Pinion warns him girl math might fry his circuits. Meanwhile, Ledo gets nervous as he wanders through to the equivalent of the ghetto on a ship. Suddenly, he gets ambushed by Tarzan in a dress, looking for an innocent back to bend. On the other hand, Amy and the girls begin their race to the sprinklers and speed through the neighboring ships. Meanwhile, Pinion gets Chamber to lower his head as he hopes to turn him into the new grill. Bellows shows up and nags Pinion for not doing his repair work, so Pinion offers her some of his meat to calm her down. Back in the ship streets, Ledo gets chased by what he doesn't understand and calls out to Chamber for help. Pinion tells Chamber that Ledo needs to learn a few things about society, so Chamber agrees to abandon him. Just then, Ridget conveniently shows up to take a break and kicks back beside Bellows, who points out how daring her swimsuit is. On the side of the fleet, Ledo gets chased up the sprinklers, and when he reaches the end, the staircase gives way, and he ends up falling till Amy catches him with her surf kite. However, the race continues, so Amy pulls out all the stops to pass the girl, and finally wins the match. Afterward, Amy starts the pump while Ledo recovers from his trauma. As they all relax, the tower begins to shake, so the girls rush over to watch the sprinklers activate. When Ledo sees them, he follows their lead and takes a sip of his drink too. Later, Amy drops Ledo off to continue his task of running through the Valley of the Shadow of Death. He finally makes it through alive and reaches the spot he's been looking for. There he meets with a granny who's surprised when she reads the letter. She wonders what he intends to do it, but ultimately hands him a box and kicks him out. Now Ledo realizes he needs to go back through hell again. Only half of his shirt makes it out, and when he returns he finds most of the fleet out for the party. Chamber is basically a giant pan now while Pinion laments everyone finding out about the barbecue. Amy welcomes Ledo back, ignoring the location of those lipstick stains. When she opens up the box, everyone gets excited to taste what's inside the bottle. Amy helps Ledo get a plate of meat, and when he tastes of the brandy sauce, the taste blows his mind. They all sit and watch the sunset, but when a gust of wind whooshes by, party time finally ends and they return to their dull jobs. Amy tells Ledo it was supposed to be a party for him, which was Pinion's idea to cheer him up since Ledo couldn't find any work. Amy thanks him for working hard for everyone, which makes Ledo happy. Then she whisks Ledo away to continue the job search for anything that doesn't involve cow dung. The next day, Ledo wonders what to do with so much money since he only needs food and oxygen. He worries that they might have given him more than he deserves just as Amy shows up to check on him. Ledo tells her he doesn't know how to use his salary, so Amy informs him of an upcoming carnival, where he can buy lots of fun stuff. As they walk around the ships, she tells him what a carnival is like. They arrive at one of her delivery spots, and Amy offers Ledo as manpower for the fisherman. When the man asks for his mecha, Ledo tells him he's flying solo this time. Later, the man shows them a galaxy strip, which is basically a huge fishing pond where fish get trapped. Moments later, Ledo mans one of their mechas and finds their controls easy. When he asks for the information support system, the man tells him to use his own eyes and sends him forward. Ledo walks to the edge of the ship and jumps into the water. When he resurfaces, the boss tells him to move to the galaxy strip quietly, so Ledo instructs the mecha to set coordinates. The boss tells Ledo to simply swim, but Ledo breaks the news that he can't, so they end up fishing him out and sacking him. Afterward, Amy suggests they get lunch, so Amy orders an entire buffet for herself, while Ledo sticks with a plate of barf. Amy tells him not to feel bad about the job and suggests he hang out at the carnival for the day. But first, they have to eat. Ledo says his barf tastes good, so Amy tells him to show it on his face sometimes. Ledo tries to practice smiling when Saya and Nulty show up again. Amy tells Ledo she has to go but promises to meet him at the festival later. After, Chamber suggests going on the fishing mission alone, so Ledo tells him to knock himself out. Chamber heads to the fishing boats and informs the boss that he'll be going on the mission solo. The boss tells him to grab some fishing nets, but Chamber simply dives in alone. Meanwhile, Pinion meets up with Ledo and tries to cheer him up from failing his job. When they sit, Pinion asks Ledo if he's homesick, so Ledo says he is, but there's no way to return yet. Ledo laments being so different from the people, so Pinion tells him they just don't understand him at all. Just then, Amy and her friends put on a dance show for the crowd, while Pinion asks Ledo if there's anything he wants to do on the ship. When Ledo has zero idea as usual, Pinion suggests going salvaging with him, which could lead to lots of money. Ledo says he already has money, so Pinion explains that he can buy nicer things with money, even a large ship. At that moment, Bellows interrupts and tells Ledo to team up with her instead, the real pro. She offers to teach him everything he needs to know, and not just about salvaging. Pinion insists that if Ledo sticks with him, they'll be eating well every night, while Bellows offers technical mastery of the art of salvaging. Pinion offers free booze and rice cakes, but he doesn't mean food. Bellows and Pinion start to argue over it, while Ledo focuses on the free rice cakes dancing before his eyes. Finally, the food arrives, but when the waitress uncovers it, Ledo thinks it's the Hado's and pulls his gun out. As Ledo continues to freak out, Bellows shows him it's just a harmless octopus and wonders what he'll do if he meets a whale squid. Suddenly, Chamber contacts Ledo for assistance. It turns out that Chamber wasn't exactly good at fishing either. The clunk of metal had used his gravity waver to suck in the fish and cause a whole water mushroom above the surface. The result was minced fish, which the boss was not too pleased about. When Ledo arrived, Chamber asked for his help, so Ledo was happy to jump in and take control. The boss tells Ledo to simply use a net this time, so Ledo asks for the biggest net possible and the help of the other mechas. This time, Ledo is able to catch a ton of fish, and they all work together to reel their catch in. The boss is finally pleased, though Bellows scolds him for not actually teaching Ledo anything. That night, Amy and Ledo hang out after the carnival, so Ledo shows her he's finally finished with the flute. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning strikes, and Ledo rushes to protect Amy, while Chamber searches for the enemy. Amy assures Ledo everything is fine, and tells him to look out at sea. Suddenly, a beautiful wall of light emerges, and Ledo is so enchanted by it that he forgets to let go of Amy. Amy explains that the lights form when a galaxy loop emerges, and this snaps Ledo back to reality. Amy then tells Ledo to practice the flute more, so Ledo asks if that's what she did with dancing. He then asks to see her dance, so Amy agrees to show him as a token of her appreciation. Ledo's mouth forgets how to close as he watches Amy's body in positions he's never seen before. It ends up being a far better offer than anything Pinion could have offered. After, they head to visit Bevel, and Ledo hands out a present for him. There, Ledo tells them that he was invited to try salvaging jobs, so Bevel tells him he might find out what was on the planet in ancient times. The next day, Ledo tries out salvaging with Bellows, who is surprised he chose her instead of Pinion. Ledo says he has a lot to learn from her, but she assures him Chamber might soon one-up her teaching methods. Suddenly, Ledo gets an alarm and pushes Bellows to the side to protect her. Chamber confirms the presence of a Hado's, and when Ledo hears this, he orders Chamber to eliminate it. While Chamber flies up to confront it, Bellows yells out to stop, informing him that it's just a whale squid. Chamber doesn't listen and fires a shot, but it misses the whale squid, while the shockwaves push Bellows over. Bellows warns Ledo that provoking it would only make it more violent, but when she gets attacked, she has to detach her parts. Ledo tries to fire at the squid, but Chamber warns him that he might accidentally hit Bellows. At this, Ledo changes tactics to simply squeezing the life out of the whale squid. Later, Bellows angrily looks down at her damaged mecha, while Joe asks her if Ledo really destroyed a whale squid. Meanwhile, the captains hold a meeting when they hear about this, and Bridget's Ledo-shaped headache returns. The captains lament the rumors that this will bring about a curse, but Bridget insists it's simply superstition. At the same time, a large crowd gathers to stare at Chamber, and when Pinion sees the whale squid guts all over, he gets an idea. Meanwhile, Ledo picks off a sample of the whale squid and gives Chamber to analyze. Ledo spots a Hado's claw and pulls it out, then he asks Chamber to check if the Hados there have any unique traits. Suddenly, Ledo remembers that Hados he fought in space and wonders if he could have brought it back with him. Ledo promises to gather information from the fleet when he notices Amy approaching him. Meanwhile, the commander gets checked out by Dr. Ordum, who tells him to take some days off once in a while. He suggests moving to a pastoral ship, but the commander says he wants to keep protecting the smiles and laughter of the people who live there. Dr. Ordum brings up the issue of the whale squid, but the commander says that he counts it as a privilege to face whatever life throws at him, because he plans to pass the torch to his successor soon. Meanwhile, Pinion tries to convince a bunch of mechanics that the whale squid territory is full of treasures. The men doubt his claims since no one's ever been there before, but Pinion assures them someone told him about it before he died. When the men ask if he already has Ledo on board with his plan, Pinion says he's working on it, so the men tell him to come back when he's not dreaming. Elsewhere, Bridget scolds Bellows for allowing Ledo to attack a whale squid, and now all the ship's captains are uneasy. Bellows takes responsibility for not telling him beforehand, but Ledo insists that he intends on doing the same thing if he sees any more. When Bridget tries to object, Ledo says that annihilating the Hados is the only option for humankind. When Ledo continues to insist, Bridget reminds him that he's on the Gargantia fleet now. Just then, the other captains walk in and tell Bridget the commander wants an update. Ledo and Bellows are excused, but before Bellows leaves, she spots Pinion trying to meet with Flange. Later, Ledo asks Bevel for information on the whale squids, but Bevel and Amy warn him to leave them alone since they don't attack unless provoked. Ledo refuses to accept that and insists on eliminating them, so Amy tells him not to drag them into their stupid war. Ledo informs them that the Hados ignore them because their civilization is primitive, but confrontation is only a matter of time. He warns them that if they don't plan ahead, it'll be too late when the Hados attacks, and this time, Amy and Bevel have nothing to say. Ledo plans to eliminate them before it comes to that, making Amy and Bevel sad. They try to convince him, but he storms out. Later, Bellows tells Pinion to give up on his plan of looting the whale squid territory. Pinion asks what's wrong with it, but Bellows insists he could be putting the fleet at risk. Pinion asks her to join in instead, but Bellows refuses to join his childish expedition. Pinion gets mad as Bellows calls out his ego problems, so he grabs her violently, which only proves her point. When he lets go, he says he only wants to avenge his brother, but Bellows tells him it's nothing but a pipe dream. Back at the hangar, Ledo asks Chamber if he's been able to contact the Alliance, but there's still no progress. However, the whale squid analysis is complete and Chamber assures Ledo they're the same species. Ledo feels confident in his decision to eliminate them and wonders why the others don't understand. At this, Chamber reveals that, unlike the Alliance, the Earthians believe in coexistence and mutual prosperity. Later, one of the lookouts spots something in the galaxy current. When someone suspects it's whale squids, Andy quickly flies out to meet Ledo. At the same time, Ledo gets an alert of several Hados approaching. At this, Ledo calls for Chamber and gets ready to move out. However, before he can, Amy cuts in front of him and begs him to stop. At the same time, Bridget gets news that a ton of whale squid were coming right at them, which was pretty much unheard of. News about the squids spreads quickly, so people run off the streets and pull their mechas out of the water immediately. Some even start praying to the gods to forgive them as the whale squids approach rapidly. The commander meets with the rest of the defense squad and tells them to turn off the sirens. He then speaks directly to the people and assures them no harm will come to them if they do as he proposes. He tells them to cut the powers to the engines and turn off every light or sound. All the ships comply immediately, and the commander tells everyone to stay where they are. The engines stop moving and noisy grandmothers are told to shut up. On the other hand, Ledo tells Amy to get out of the way, but she refuses. Ledo pushes through, but Amy grabs onto him still. Ledo offers to leave their fleet if he's causing them trouble, but Amy says she doesn't want him doing anything dangerous. Bridget shows up and tells Ledo to stand down, but when Ledo refuses, she tells him he can do as he pleases if the whale squids attack the fleet. Then she holds up her gun to prevent any other option. At that moment, the whale squids finally reach them and begin passing under the ships peacefully. The citizens make sure to stop any form of noise from going off, while the commander waits nervously for the outcome. When the whale squids finally leave, Amy tries to comfort Ledo, but he tells her not to touch him. He insists he can't do his duty if he stays there. making Amy cry. The next day, Pinion tells the commander his plan to take Ledo and a crew to do some salvaging in whale squid territory. He hands them a list of volunteers who want to lead Gargantia and Flange, also informs them of his wish to leave. Rigid and the others ask why he would do this, explaining that their defenses would be left bare. Flange insists that they have to retrieve the secrets of the old era and hopes they can understand. However, the commander refuses to commission such a foolish plan when he suddenly experiences a heart attack. Later, the captains gather beside the commander as Dr. Ordum oversees his treatment. However, the commander turns to Rigid and hands her a golden key, choosing her as his successor. Rigid insists that the Gargantia needs him, but he tells her he has faith in her as he closes his eyes for the final time. Dr. Ordum declares him dead, and all the captains bow their heads in respect. Meanwhile, Chamber tells Ledo he's finally confirmed the Alliance's coordinates. Unfortunately, Chamber is not equipped to travel faster than light and won't be able to rejoin them. As for their distress signals, they are estimated to reach the fleet in about 6,000 years, which means Ledo can never go back. Later, the fleet prepares for the commander's burial while the captains worry about Rigid's appointment as the new commander. Suddenly, Rigid shows up to discuss the crisis of Flange's ships, wanting to leave, but the captains remind her it's the commander's funeral and scold her for suggesting they miss it. The captains then head out for the ceremony, but one of them reminds her that there will always be opposition. Meanwhile, Pinion pitches his idea to Ledo and tells him he knows the location of their nest. This gets Ledo's attention, so Pinion tells him his plan to grab some treasure while Ledo eliminates as many squids as he wants. Since Ledo only has one goal, they officially make a deal. At the same time, Rigid begs Flange to stay, but he warns her that a fleet with weak leadership will become the target of pirates. He reminds her that protecting the peaceful lives of his people is his main duty, so Rigid has no choice. Out at the market, Eni and Saya ask Melty if she's really leaving too, so she tells them she only has her granddad and can't afford to leave him alone. She assures them she'll be fine and reveals that even Ledo is going with them. Amy is shocked to hear this, but Melty assures her that it's true. Meanwhile, the commander's funeral begins and the people begin filling his coffin with sand. Flange shows up to pay his respects too. Then he tells the other captain to guide Rigid well while he says his final goodbyes to the captain. On the other hand, Rigid stays in her office and stares at her funeral outfit, unsure what to do. She looks through the pictures of her family with the commander and begins to feel sad. When she leaves her office, Pinion asks her to sign his parting request, but when Rigid refuses, he tells her not to stop people from leaving if she can't protect them. Later, Amy goes to find Ledo, but when she sees the look on his face, she decides to stay away. She settles for stalking him from afar when Saya shows up and asks what's wrong. Amy tries to hide it, but Saya suggests going with Ledo if she's just going to turn emo over him. Amy says she has to stay there with Bevel, who needs Dr. Ordum to survive. So Saya says she's relieved because she would have missed Amy if she left. The commander's funeral continues to proceed as the citizens pay their respects while Flange's ships disconnect themselves from the fleet. Bellows goes to pay Rigid a visit and suggests taking a break. Rigid insists that she can't afford to look weak right now, but Bellows tells her she's doing more than enough. Bellows informs her of the time her father left her his business, and she tried to do everything herself. One day she got stuck underneath a target, and she thought she was going to die. However, after Pinion helped her, he warned her that her actions were the same as saying she didn't trust her shipmates. Rigid insists that the commander did everything himself, but Bellows reminds her that he actually relied on Rigid a lot. Bellows assures her that she already knows what to do and considers herself lucky to be under her. Meanwhile, Amy returns to her home where Bevel asks if Ledo is really leaving. Amy confirms it and tells him it's a shame since they are starting to get along. At that, Amy breaks down and starts crying as she wonders why he doesn't value his own life and wants to continue suffering. Bevel tries to comfort her as he realizes what he must do. That night, the people head toward the final point of the funeral while Rigid watches the ships continue to disconnect. Suddenly, she watches a ship reconnect as some people return to the fleet. She then remembers the commander trusting her decisions and knowing what she must do too. At the same time, Bevel finds Ledo and asks him if he really has to leave. Ledo explains that his actions are for mankind and Amy as well. He hands Bevel the Hado's flute and tells him it was made by a child who looked just like him. He suspects that child might have been his little brother, but that's just how the Galactic Alliance worked. If the Earth Hados decide to expand their territory one day, a clash would be inevitable, and Bevel would not survive. Despite Bevel's objections, Ledo says he doesn't want Amy to experience such loss, so he'll destroy every last Hados. Back at the funeral, the men prepare to cover the coffin when Rigid shows up and apologizes for being late. She scoots up some sand and pours it on the commander as she thanks him for everything. Once the ceremony is over, they launch the coffin into the water and say their final goodbye. After, Bridget turns to the people and insists they need to discuss the future of the fleet. She reveals her desire to protect the fleet and everyone on it, but explains how powerless she is by herself. With this, she asks the people for help in protecting the fleet as well and begs for their cooperation. Everyone goes silent for a second, but before Bellows can jump in, the men assure her she can always count on them to rebuild the fleet. At this, Bridget expresses her heartfelt gratitude. The next day, Ledo shows up at Amy's house and tells her he's about to leave. He goes inside to say his goodbyes, so Bevel tells him he'll only hold on to the flute for Ledo, so he has to come back. Ledo simply thanks them for everything, while Amy stops herself from crying. Moments later, Flange's ships sail away from the Gargantia as Bellows goes to comfort Amy and calls the rest of them fools for leaving. Meanwhile, Flange's fleet heads toward the Seat of Fog, where no one has gone in and lived to tell the tale. Pinion spots the whale squids approaching, so he tells Ledo he's finally up. Ledo and Chamber jump into the water and swim to a group of approaching Hados. Chambers says they're weaker than the ones in space, so Ledo is able to take them on one by one. According to Chambers' analysis, they would be able to take out all the Hados with little difficulty. On the surface, Pinion tells the shipmates to stay the course while the crew nervously waits for what comes next. Pinion assures them that they'll be fine as he doesn't intend to screw up a second time. Years ago, Pinion and his brother dove straight into whale squid territory, but that time, Pinion was the scaredy cat. When they arrived at a huge facility, his brother offered to take a look inside, while Pinion was told to keep watch outside. Once inside, his brother revealed that the building must have been an industrial facility. Pinion noticed a whale squid that entered the building too, so he told his brother to start heading back. However, Pinion listened as his brother kept on going till he encountered a whale squid. Suddenly, a horde of whale squids rushed out of the facility, including a huge one that began confronting Pinion. His brother told him to run, but it was too late for his brother. In the present, Pinion was hoping to avenge his brother. A bunch of squid guts blasted above the surface, and the people rejoiced over Ledo's victory so far. Chamber warns Ledo that 23% of his power has been depleted, so Ledo relies on his weapon to continue the job for now. Suddenly, Chamber noticed even more whale squids approaching, so he activated a proximity fuse, which took out a huge part of their numbers. On the surface, the crew watched as the water was filled with bodies of whale squids who weren't so invincible after all. Pinion then told Ledo to prepare to lure the squids out of their nest when they were ready for them. Ledo agreed and swam forward to the densest part of the squids. Then he began retreating slowly while the squids tried attacking him. Chamber warned that they would have to retreat, but Pinion radioed in just in time and said they were ready. At this, Ledo lured them to the agreed spot and signaled to Pinion, who threw loaded canisters in. Chamber then activated his anti-shock shield as the bombs exploded and took out the squids. After, Chamber reported that 67% of the whole squids had been taken out, so the men continued to toss more explosives. Meanwhile, Pinion told Ledo to move on with the rest of the plan. The crew soon noticed that the light bugs in the area could survive, but the whale squids couldn't, so they continued with the plan. Meanwhile, Chamber tells Ledo the whale squids seem to be retreating to their base and shows him a scan of what it looks like. Ledo heads toward it, wiping out any whale squids in the way. However, a huge whalefish with tiny balls inside suddenly appeared to confront him. Chamber recommended retreating since their power levels were low, but Ledo refused to give up the opportunity. The giant squid released a group of smaller squids to surround Ledo, but these ones seemed to possess an electromagnetic field around them. The giant squid had them surrounded. On the surface, the men watched a strange current move, so Pinion radioed Ledo to make sure he was okay. He began to worry when he heard nothing, but Ledo eventually responded, causing the men to celebrate. Back in the facility, Ledo laments being too careless, but Chamber explains that they must have grown weaker due to a lack of natural enemies. As a horde of whale squids came rushing toward him, he greeted them with another energy blast. On the surface, Pinion tells the men of Ledo's success and tells them to drop their anchors as they finally reach the facility. Meanwhile, Flange and his men try to watch what's happening, but the fog is too thick to see, meaning they'll have to trust Pinion blindly. Back at the facility, Ledo swims through some Hado's children and starts to eliminate them. When Ledo looks closer, he wonders if they're really Hados, as their shape looks eerily familiar. However, Chamber assures him that they are, so they keep up the extermination. Suddenly, a structure falls down, and the Chamber identifies it as the administrative block. When Ledo takes a look, Chamber identifies several CDs used for recording information, so Ledo asks him to salvage the data. Chamber is able to recover the data, but when Ledo asks him to play it, he says it's prohibited by the Galactic Alliance. Ledo demands that given their situation, the highest-ranking officer has authority to command, so he tells Chamber to display the classified data. The footage begins with a news report of a mission on the next step of humankind. A man is seen commissioning a new research facility for augmented evolution where scientists would be allowed to work freely. Soon, protests of the evolution solution were all over the country, but the founder continued to assure them that change was necessary. Eventually, the Earth began experiencing freezing conditions, which led to the development of space stations and interstellar travel vessels. However, they believed the machines weren't enough. War soon broke out against the Evolvers, and their research facility was targeted by the Continental Union. The Evolvers believed that it would be difficult to find suitable planets for colonization, which is why they hoped to evolve the human body to adapt to the vacuum of space itself. The research facility invented the symbiote, which could survive on little oxygen and endure the pressure of ocean depths. Their nutrition was provided by nanomachines which looked like tiny fireflies but were highly efficient. In the footage, a little girl was told to wave goodbye to her father as they prepared for something important. Eventually, the news stations leaked footage of humans that had evolved into symbionts. In their experiments, the evolved human was released into space and was able to survive. However, the Continental Union and the Evolvers continued to wage war. The Evolvers discovered the Union's attempt to leave them behind on Earth, so they planned to foil their plans so they could expand their territory. Eventually, even that little girl became a symbiont. Once the footage was stopped, Ledo began to question who exactly was the enemy. Suddenly, a familiar-looking Hado swam up to them, but before Ledo could stop him, Chamber eliminated it, causing Ledo to have a meltdown. Back on Gargantia, Bevel played a tune on Ledo's flute. When he heard it, she was moved to tears by how much she missed Ledo. Meanwhile, the sea was red with whale squid corpses while Pinion's men prepared to enter the facility. Chamber and Ledo emerged from the water and confirmed that all the Hados had been exterminated. Pinion quickly ordered his men to send down their mechas and secure the treasure, but while they ran off, Ledo emerged with more trauma than when he discovered the existence of drag queens. On the other hand, the crew began lowering their mechas into the facility, and when Pinion looked inside, he was sure they had finally hit the motherlode. As for Ledo, he was replaying the moments where he mercilessly wiped out the Hados, which were really humans. The babies were just like his own little brother, and this thought made him want to hurl. Meanwhile, Pinion's men continued to load up the treasures while Pinion poured a drink in honor of his brother, wishing he were there. At that moment, Flange showed up to marvel at all the stuff they were able to salvage. The best part was that there was no rust at all. However, when Flange talked about restoring the world to its former glory, Pinion insisted that it was their treasure only. When they warned him about the people who would try to take it from them, Pinion assured them they had enough firepower to stop them. At that, he instructed one of his men to prepare a broadcast warning any other fleets to stay away from their treasure. Pinion used his loud mouth to inform everyone that the whale squids had been annihilated and they had taken all the treasures from its nest. Back on the Gargantia, the citizens listened sadly as Pinion threatened to sink any approaching ship without mercy. Back on his ship, Flange receives a delivery from Melty, who asks if Ledo really wiped out the whale squids. Flange confirms it, but insists that even though he's fine with the whale squid annihilation, they ought to be trading these new treasures with other ships. Unfortunately, the ship owners under his command have rallied behind Pinion, so there was nothing they could do. Meanwhile, Ledo was reassessing everything he knew about the Galactic Alliance and their war with the Hados. Suddenly, Pinion interrupted and asked why Ledo wasn't helping them out. He asked Ledo to help unblock the shaft, but Ledo refused. Pinion asks if Ledo has lost his nerve, but Ledo gets mad and announces there's nothing left to fear since he annihilated the Hados. Back at the Gargantia, there was a depressing feeling in the air. The captains ask Bridget what she thinks of Pinion's announcement, so she says there's no need to act without proof of his claims. However, she expects that some ship owners might want to leave again and intends to respect their decision. At the same time, Bevel asks Dr. Ordum if Ledo really wiped out all the whale squids. Ordum confirms it and calls them all very foolish. On the other hand, Stacey finds Amy and suggests that Pinion is just bragging, but all Amy can think about is Ledo. Back at Flange's fleet, Pinion's men begin to face off against an unknown enemy when Pinion gets the idea to use one of the treasures. They immediately set the new cannon in place and fire a huge blast at the enemy, causing them to surrender. After Pinion's men tie up the pirate leader while the rest of the crew ask to be allowed to join them, Pinion realizes he can expand the fleet and make it invincible this way, so he agrees to spare the crew while he locks up their former leader. Later, Pinion finds Ledo alone and asks if they can borrow Chamber for a while. Ledo doesn't respond, so Pinion asks the big guy himself, but Chamber says he needs Ledo's authorization. Ledo says he doesn't care anymore, so Pinion pulls him to his feet and ushers him to a party with the rest of the crew. When they spot Chamber, the men begin cheering him on while Pinion gives a speech, giving credit to Ledo and Chamber for their success. Afterward, the people eat, drink, and party, while Ledo wonders what he's doing and who he's doing it for. Meanwhile, Chamber scans one of the treasures and calls it similar to his beam weapon. Chamber says its output is 1/5 of his, but Pinion is just fine with that. When Pinion asks if they can make it work, Chamber warns him that its use would take a ton of electricity, so Pinion asks him to try using the light bugs to power it. At the same moment, Ledo remembers the images from the classified report and can't even bring himself to continue his flute. Just then, Chamber radios in and tells Ledo that the light bugs are nanomachines that are identical to the exoskeleton of the Hados, proving that the Hados really is a result of mankind's augmented evolution. Ledo insists that the entire Galactic Alliance's war is meaningless, since he shouldn't be fighting against fellow humans. When Chamber insists that the revelation doesn't warrant the end of the Hados' annihilation, Ledo says he's tired of the Alliance's propaganda. However, Chamber informs him that he's actually speaking from his own observation of the data. Chamber explains that the mechas are proof of mankind's intellectual evolution, while the Hados gave up that intelligence to evolve based on biological needs. The two sides could never reconcile as one pursues civilization, while the other abandons it. This results in two irreconcilable survival strategies. This means that in order to survive, Ledo has no choice. Suddenly, Chamber tells Ledo he's received a transmission from an allied unit. When Ledo plays the footage, he spots his former Colonel Kugel. Back on the Gargantia, Amy delivers some letters to Ridget, who's glad to see she's finally out of her emo phase. Just then, Ridget says their current seems to be flowing through the Sea of Fogs, so they might finally get to see what's going on with Flange's fleet. Meanwhile, Flange's fleet spots something huge sailing right for them, so Flange tells his men to activate the emergency alert while he calls Pinion. At the same time, Kugel makes contact with Ledo and tells him he got his distress call when he was on the other side of the planet. Kugel then asks Ledo to come to him, so Ledo agrees to return to his squadron. Meanwhile, Pinion watches the massive fleet approaching, so he tells his men to give them a warm welcome. They immediately fire up their weapon, which does hit the target, but the fleet fires back and wipes out one of their towers instantly. When Pinion looks through his binoculars, he sees a mecha just like Chamber, and tries to call for Ledo, but Chamber informs him that he's returning to his squadron and flies out. As Ledo reaches the fleet, he notices a gathering of humans who look like malnourished Death Eaters and figures that Kugel must have taken command of the locals. When Ledo comes out of Chamber, he asks for Kugel, so a priestess asks him to follow her. A door to the inner quarters opens up and Ledo is led inside till he reaches an empty room, where he's told to wait inside. When he sits, a hologram of Kugel appears, so Ledo says he's excited to see him alive and well. However, Kugel laments getting affected by an endemic disease, which is why he couldn't leave his cockpit. Kugel then asks if Ledo would like to follow him once more, and Ledo is more than ready to do so. Ledo's Chamber links to Kugel's Striker to collect information on the disease. Striker acknowledges the request and transfers all the data. Back at Flange's fleet, Pinion's men begin to worry, so Pinion reminds them they have Ledo until he remembers Ledo just flew off. One of the crew reminds Pinion that he did broadcast their treasure to the entire world, so Pinion apologizes for being a bonehead. Flange arrives and tells the rest of the crew to get back to their positions. Then he asks Pinion if it's true that the fleet is led by one of Ledo's comrades. When Pinion confirms this, Flange wonders what they could possibly want when Melty runs up with an urgent message. Apparently, the fleet was requesting the presence of their representative. Flange offers to go, but Pinion reminds him he's responsible for their mess and offers to go instead. When Flange tries to object, the officer on the line says Pinion has been specially requested. Pinion tells Flange that it's better if he's taken hostage anyway. Besides, no one would follow him after screwing up this badly. After Pinion waits by the deck for a ship to pick him up, while Melty reminds him that people managed to follow him despite already knowing he's a dumb. They suddenly notice the ship approaching and realize it's Rackage's ship. Rackage comes out to greet Pinion, explaining that she no longer goes by the Queen of Pirates. However, she warns him to mind that dumb mouth of his. When they arrive at the fleet, Pinion notices the citizens looking pale and unnerved, so Rackage explains that the weak serve the strong according to their god's will. Pinion asks if the mecha is their god, but Rackage says that is only a servant of God that hands down judgment. Meanwhile, Kugel tells Ledo that their mission is to teach these humans how to defend themselves from the Hados and become missionaries too. At this, Ledo reveals that the Hados are also humans, but Kugel already knew and deemed it unnecessary information. He said that Hados could no longer be called human since they are driven by base instincts that do not contribute to the formation of society. However, Kugel insists that under his rule, the average well-being of the people has risen. Chamber asks for their definition of well-being, so Stryker says it's the maximization of the cost to benefit of the people, causing Chamber to agree. Kugel then asks Ledo to help him change the planet. Meanwhile, Rackage leads Pinion to an empty room where he's asked to wait. There, he finds an odd cue and begins to mess around with it till it opens. After tinkering with it some more, the box welcomes him and tells him he just passed a test to assess his skills and was judged promising. Pinion asks if the voice is a relative of Chamber, so a broadcast of Stryker emerges and introduces herself. She then commends his efforts as a mechanic so far and offers to provide him with more information on how to design and manufacture more weapons. Stryker asks him to display leadership as an engineer officer, but Pinion says he's not a soldier. However, he says he's willing to cooperate if they can guarantee the safety of their ship. At this, the hologram stops, and robed men wheel food in for Pinion to eat. However, he's asked to read a written notice before he can touch any of the food while his forehead gets painted. Pinion proceeds to read out the notice of the Phalange fleet joining the Kugel fleet, shocking everyone. Phalange recognizes it as a polite demand to surrender, but he has no choice but to accept. Moments later, the two ships connect and the hooded weirdos meet with Phalange and congratulate him for making the right choice. Phalange asks what they're trying to do, so Priestess explains that ships would be selected based on their ability. When Phalange tries to object to the plan, the Priestess warns him of God's wrath and shows him their firepower. With no other choice, Phalange kneels and the hooded men paint his forehead and bless him. Meanwhile, Pinion and Rackage walk through a more civilized part of the fleet, so Pinion asks if it's the home for rich folks. Rackage explains that they don't use money, so people are given rations based on their contributions to the fleet. Rackage informs him that the rest of his people are being split up and joining the fleet as they speak. When Pinion objects, Rackage says they couldn't keep possible insurgents together, and warned him not to contact his friends. Later, Ledo returns to Chamber, who scans him for any viruses. Ledo realizes he can't compare to Kugel's feats, so Chamber explains that his choice to stay in his cockpit created feelings of awe in the fleet members. Ledo wonders if it's really okay to keep people in perpetual fear, but Chamber assures him that it was deemed most effective in the Alliance. At this, Ledo wonders if he should have stayed in his cockpit too. Meanwhile, Rackage returns to her ship, where her servants ask if she needs them to dispose of Pinion. However, Rackage says it was too early for that, and they still needed his skills. The next day, Ledo wakes up to a transmission from Kugel, who tells him he needs his help. Kugel plans to proceed with his large-scale missionary work thanks to having 2 machine calibers now. He then shows them the first target fleet, and Ledo immediately recognizes it as Gargantia. Meanwhile, Pinion is taken to a large room with salvaged weapons that need his repair. The Priestess even hands him a tool for looking inside the devices, and Pinion feels like he's in mechanic heaven. As Pinion gets a closer look at his new treasure, Rackage calls him a shallow man for being easily bought. She then offers him a deal to help him escape in exchange for using Ledo's mecha. Pinion's dwindling brain cells don't get what she means, so she explains that she's disgusted by the ways of the fleet and intends to go back to her pirate ways. At the same time, Ledo walks up to Kugel and begs him to refrain from attacking Gargantia. Kugel refuses, explaining that it's their duty to bring order to the planet, and if they can't reunite with the fleet, they'll turn Earth into a second Avalon. Ledo finds it hard to argue, so he accepts his orders. Later, Pinion starts working on some new weapons when Melty shows up to talk to him. Melty scolds him for acting like a big shot. Then she hands him a delivery with a hidden message. Meanwhile, Ledo thinks hard about the utopia they called Avalon, and all the time spent fighting the Hados. Suddenly, he notices a squirrel that reminds him of Amy's pet and realizes how much he misses her. At the same time, Pinion sneaks away to meet Phalange, who tells him the members of the fleet seem a tad bit possessed. Phalange asks if Pinion will allow the same thing to happen to their fleet, so Pinion tells him about Rackage's plan to revolt. However, Ledo was unlikely to agree to give Chamber to some sea hack. Meanwhile, Ledo experienced the rain for a second time and remembered how the Gargantia fleet had supported each other. Suddenly, the squirrel ran off, so Ledo chased after it till he noticed the Kugel fleet performing a word ceremony. Ledo asked Chamber what was going on, but Chamber didn't detect anything strange. Just then, a group of sickly-looking women and men were rolled out in white robes while the guard rails were lowered. The priestess announced that these brave souls would be giving their lives for the sake of the others. When Ledo saw a boy among them, it reminded him of his younger brother in Bevel, but the people stopped him from interfering. At that moment, the people were dropped into the water to their deaths while Pinion and the others stood frozen in fear. Pinion finally concluded that the fleet was bat crazy, so Rakage informed him that their next target was Gargantia. Upon hearing this, Pinion decided his partnership with the Kugel fleet was over. At the same time, Ledo realized that he only came all this way to protect the people that he cared about. After thinking about their time together, it was clear what he had to do. Ledo returned to Chamber, who informed him of his orders to prepare for combat. When he asked what Ledo's decision was, Ledo realized he had never made a real decision in his life. At this, he asks Chamber if he would be able to fight Stryker, and since they're outside the Galactic Alliance, Chamber says it's possible. Pinion overhears this and gives him an approving nod. Later, the fleet lines hundreds of mechas up for the raid on Gargantia. At this, Melty prepares to fly her surf kite, remembering Ledo's instruction to warn Gargantia of the impending invasion. Once Ledo watches Melty fly off, he tells Chamber to stand by for combat. Hours later, Melty struggles to stay awake as she finally lays eyes on the Gargantia. However, she passes out from exhaustion and begins to freefall till Amy shows up and grabs her. Melty is barely able to warn Amy of the invasion before passing out again. They eventually return to the fleet, where Melty is happy to be reunited with her friends. Meanwhile, Ridget meets with the ship's captains and plans to flee the upcoming war, until Amy busts in and tells them Ledo plans to fight Kugel's fleet alone. And he asks if they're really ready to run from the fight, so Dr. Ordom tells Ridget it's about time they use the key, the one passed down to Ridget, which opened the stairway to heaven. Meanwhile, the Kugel fleet prepares for their new crusade as Stryker shows up and reminds them of the plan to build a glorious utopia. Kugel tells them to simply obey him as he whips out his weapons as an obvious reason to comply. Suddenly, Ledo busts through the floor and flies up to meet him. Kugel asks for an explanation, so Ledo tells him Earth isn't the same as the Galactic Alliance. Kugel insists that it is their duty to enlighten the humans and fires the first shot at Ledo but misses. The two mechas start fighting while the priestess warns the people to keep their distance. Chamber continues to evade Stryker's attacks while sending some of his own to counter, but they can't seem to stop Stryker. Ledo wonders how Stryker is so powerful, so Chamber suggests that it has drawn power from an external source. Just then, an energy beam shoots out at Stryker and Ledo notices Pinion trying to help. Ledo warns him to withdraw, but Pinion tells him to put a sock in it as his other men stand by to help. The priestess instructs her men to stop them when they suddenly see explosions, disconnecting Flange's ships from the fleet as Flange instructs his men to seize control of the main ship. The mechas start moving out to stop the revolt, but before they fully submerge, a larger mecha pushes them back on deck, and it turns out to be Rakage. She's able to take out multiple mechas at once while her men climb up to assist. Rakage commends Pinion for finally acting like a man, but Pinion tells her to focus on the mission and kicks him out. Back in the air, Chamber warns Ledo to retreat and focus fire on the cockpit, but Ledo says he doesn't want to take Kugel's life. Stryker then rams into Ledo, causing him to lose his balance. When Pinion sees this, he grabs one of the cannons and fires it at Stryker. Getting a direct hit, Ledo uses the opportunity to grab hold of Stryker and ram it into the side of the ship at maximum power. Once Stryker is pinned down, Ledo hops out of his cockpit and forcibly opens Stryker's. However, all he sees is Kugel's corpse, while a copy of his voice comes from Stryker's remote. Kugel's body decays on the spot as Stryker reboots its system and breaks free. Chamber catches Ledo's fall, and together they stare at Stryker's lifeless cockpit. Stryker insists that even though Kugel is a pile of sand now, her actions are in accordance with his directives. Stryker claims she's no longer an individual mobile weapon, but is now the missionary regulation system for mankind. So she's basically a robot god. Ledo calls bullshit as he points out she's only succeeded in making slaves, but Stryker claims she's freed the people from the burden of making decisions. Chamber instantly steps in to tell his mecha cousin she's high on spoiled engine oil. He reminds her that creatures that abandon decision-making can no longer be considered humans, which includes the members of her society. Stryker still insists that everyone, including Ledo and Chamber, should serve her, but Chamber says he only serves his human pilot, not any collection of bolts claiming to be God. Chamber tells Ledo that Stryker has gone rogue and basically undermined the point of their existence to help humans. He suggests they handle her deactivation as a priority, aka kick her metal ass. Ledo is happy to hear that, so hops into the cockpit, and they fly off to battle. Meanwhile, the war with the fleets keeps going and Rakage tells her men to either win or die. At the same time, Flange's men advise him to retreat, but Flange insists that after turning their backs on the Gargantia, they must not fail them again. Outside, Pinion's men inform him that they had fired their last shot, and now all the weapons need charging. At this, Pinion calls all his men useless and insists on doing the rest himself. He then radios Wreckage to clear a path for his men and tells them to get out of there. The men begin to cry for his sake, but Pinion assures them he'll never let go of the treasures he and his brother dreamed of again. With that, his crew evacuates sadly while Pinion gets ready to reunite with his brother. Meanwhile, Chamber and Stryker continue to fly around like mosquitoes with lightsabers. Ledo wonders how Stryker can be so strong without a pilot, but Chamber says she must have analyzed the way Kugel pilots and created an autopilot program. This makes it almost 50% more agile than Chamber. At this point, Ledo kicks himself for mindlessly obeying orders to the point that he couldn't tell when he was basically talking to Ultron. Ledo orders Chamber to enable Neuro Plus power, but Chamber warns him that the neuromechanical merge could lead to his death. Ledo says he doesn't care, but Chamber denies him access. At this, Ledo explains that Stryker is a monster of humankind's making who couldn't stop hating each other till their planet was destroyed. Since neither of them belongs on Earth and can't return to the Alliance, nothing else matters but stopping Stryker. Hearing this, Chamber agrees with this logic and activates the Neuro Plus power. Ledo's nervous system gets connected to all of Chamber's systems, enhancing his output to 150% for barely 8 minutes. At this, Ledo charges forward and lands a clean hit on Stryker. But before he can continue, he notices Amy flying toward him. Meanwhile, Ridget, with the support of all the ship's captains, heads to the fleet's secret weapon. While Ridget holds onto the key, Dr. Ordom tells her that it holds unmatched power that can send its target beyond the horizon. Ridget says she's ready to take responsibility for this power and slots in the key that activates this system. At the same time, Amy tells Ledo they're all fighting with him, and she's realized she wants to stay with him forever, so she begs him to come back. Just then, a missile flies past them and lands in the water, causing a massive shockwave. Nearby ships radio back to the Gargantia to adjust their coordinates and fire another shot. The captains receive the order and Ridget fires another warhead that decimates the main ship of the fleet. Pinion can't believe his eyes, but Flange recognizes it as the stairway to heaven and is struck with fear. When Stryker sees the damage, she determines the Gargantia to be a bigger threat and heads to it to destroy it, but Ledo rushes to stop her. Meanwhile, the priestess tries to assure her people that Kugel will defeat the enemy till she notices the reinforcements approaching and realizes they need to secure the facility with weapons. At that moment, Wreckage radios into Pinion and warns him of approaching mechas. Pinion says he's raiding the tower to explode, but Wreckage tells him to stop showing off and get to the observation deck. She explains that the Gargantia plans to blow up the facility, so she tells Pinion to jump and manages to catch him with her mecha. While they ride off, Ridget sends the last missile to the facility and blows it to Kingdom Come, ending the priestess' last shred of hope. All that's left is the battle with Ledo and Stryker, but Ledo is already reaching a critical point. Chamber asks Ledo if he's willing to sacrifice his life, so Ledo thinks of Amy and realizes she was the one who taught him how to live. He then wishes he could hear her voice one last time. Suddenly, Chamber deems Ledo unfit to be a soldier and relieves him of his duty. He carefully ejects Ledo from the cockpit and tells him to stay alive and pursue happiness, while Chamber continues to face Stryker alone. Stryker tells Chamber he is malfunctioning and gives him a final warning to reboot. In response, Chamber tells her to go to hell and uses the last of his juice to blow them both up. Ledo lands safely in the sea and cries as he watches the lights from the explosion. Months later, the Gargantia goes back to normal and even teams up with the pirates. Ridget continues to lead the fleet while Bevel becomes a teacher of archaeology, so that future generations can learn from human history. Ledo becomes a genius explorer, finding more and more lost records under the water without causing problems with the whale squids. Amy waits to welcome Ledo, and the two walk off together happily. And as for the whale squids, they'd also lived happily ever after. If you made it to the end, comment Chamber passes the vibe check. And if you like anime recaps like this, then watch this video right here.